Here we will look at lens corrections within Lightroom Develop module. Here's a comparison before and after of the same image. As you can see, as the building was high up and no tilt shift lens was used, there's some distortion of the vertical lines in particular in this image. They will eventually meet at a vanishing point up off of the page. But to get this image to be a perfect rectangle, we can use lens corrections. Simply cropping the image wouldn't allow for those sides to be corrected in essence. So here in Develop module, if I scroll down to lens corrections, which appears underneath the basic tone curves, HSL, split toning, and detail panels. In the right panel of the Develop module, you have lens corrections. There are 4 choices here: basic, profile, color, and manual. We'll go through each of these briefly. Basic has a couple of choices here: enable profile corrections, remove chromatic aberration, constrain crop, and an auto option. Okay. If you enable profile corrections, that allows Lightroom to automatically adjust any profile that it has recognized within Lightroom. For example, if you're using a specialized lens that is known for certain types of distortion, it will go ahead and take care of that. Chromatic aberration has nothing to do with angles, but this image happens to have some chromatic aberration. Occasionally, an unwanted color will form at the edges of your images. Here there's an aqua or blue color. If I simply click on Remove Chromatic Aberration, you can see that Lightroom did a really good job of removing that for me. I'm not going to check Constrain Crop right now because there's nothing that's been adjusted in that respect. But if I go ahead and click on Auto, Lightroom detects the horizontal and vertical lines and tries to make them into a perfect rectangle. And it did a very good job at that. I'm going to go ahead and undo that though, so that I can show you how it works manually. Over in the Profile option, if you click on Enable Profile Corrections, you can choose the make and model of your lens. If I chose Canon and a very wide angle 15mm, essentially a fisheye lens, Lightroom would try to correct for the distortion that would have occurred, kind of the opposite effect of this in a fisheye lens. I'm just going to go ahead and go back to an earlier state, but just to show you what that can do. In color, you have the Remove Chromatic Aberration option, and then a little more control over the specific colors. I'm just going to leave that checked. I think it did a really good job of removing that already. In the manual panel, if you hover over any of these sliders, you see that this grid is superimposed onto the image, showing perfectly vertical and horizontal lines. Distortion affects more of a barrel distortion. So I'm going to just leave that alone. Put it back to 0. The vertical correction is the one I'm going to be most concerned with here. But even before that, I'm going to change the horizontal a little bit. And my goal is going to be for this horizontal line in the middle and the top horizontal line to match up with the grid lines the best I can. I'm going to rotate just a slight amount, and I'm a lot happier with that than what it was just before. Okay, so slight change. The big change in this particular image to remove the keystoning or distorted verticals is going to come with the vertical slider. So all I'm doing here is taking it toward the negative, and it's straightening it out pretty well. I will need to rotate just a little bit to get those as perfectly matched and lined up to the grid as I can, both the vertical and horizontal lines. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now, if I were to click Constrain Crop here, it would eliminate any of the extra areas that were created from that crop, all of the white areas. It might crop a little too much from what I want, so I'm just going to undo that and go ahead to the regular crop option. And that way I have a little bit more control over exactly what I want to crop. You could also, if you really wanted to preserve this bottom left corner here, for example, use something like the clone tool in Lightroom or Photoshop, which we'll look at the clone and healing tools in Lightroom in a future lesson, but you could redo a corner like that, for example, if you wanted to. I'm just going to go ahead and crop. And then this image, I believe, needs significant adjustments as far as contrast. It's a bit flat at the moment, and so forth. Some significant work would need to be done to get it to the state shown in the example. But the main issues I wanted to concentrate on here were the correction of the distortion and then also the chromatic aberration. We'll look at one or two more images. Here's a side-by-side comparison of an image as shot and then after adjusted. So a series of adjustments were made to this image to bring it from one state to another. One of those was a lens correction to bring the vertical lines to be perfectly vertical instead of coming in toward one another at the bottom. Significant contrast, exposure, tone curves, and so forth changes were made as well. I won't be concentrating on those here. And then some split toning was applied to the image. We'll be going over that in the next lesson. I'm going to go to the Develop module here and scroll down to Lens Corrections. I could try Basic and Auto, and that did a fairly good job, but not quite as much as I would have liked it to. So I'm just going to go back to the original. So I'm going to go to Manual here and adjust the vertical adjustments, this time toward the positive rather than negative. And rotate just slightly. And it looks like there's a little bit of barrel distortion here. So I'm changing that somewhat. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm just going to go ahead and trust Lightroom to crop this for me, and there you go. Finally, here's a piece of furniture, and it was actually at the top of a stairwell, so it was not possible to get the lens completely parallel to the furniture, which would have ensured a less distorted image, more rectangular. So in Develop module, I'll go down to Lens Corrections, Manual again, and adjust the vertical distortion. Rotate slightly, a little bit of the barrel distortion, and I'm pretty happy with those changes. I'll go ahead and trust Lightroom to constrain crop, and if I went to the regular crop, you can see that grid lines up pretty evenly with the both horizontal and vertical edges. I see a little bit of the top curve has been cut off. That doesn't necessarily need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that in the regular crop tool. And there you go.